Welcome to Jay Does Reviews. I'm Jay and the review is Spawn from 1997. The beloved comic book series by renowned comic book creator Todd McFarland is about mercenary Al Simmons dying in action, making a deal with the devil Malbolgia for great power in order to lead Malbolgia's army, and saying screw that and using his new powers to help humanity and become Spawn. Now, this should have been the perfect setup to an action-packed extravaganza from the raw synergy of the 1990s grunge culture, right? Well, when you get the future director of Marmaduke from 2022, Mark A.Z. DePay, he who, let's just face it, did better jobs directing special effects of other movies than his own damn movie, we got some problems. Now, before we begin, I just wanted to get some of my biases out of the way. For starters, I do not like this movie. Not really. In the review, I'll go into why I don't like this movie, but that doesn't stop you from liking this movie. I'm not saying people who like this movie are wrong, and I'm not saying that people who don't like this movie are wrong. Opinions are subjective, and you are entitled to your own. This is just my opinion. I've also read some of the Spawn comics, so this could influence how I view the movie, because I viewed other portrayals of Spawn, which could change, well, which one I like more and whatnot. But a positive bias that's still bias is that I love music. If a movie has a good soundtrack, even if it's bad, there's a good chance I'm still likely to like the movie just a little bit more if the soundtrack's good, such as the Dune 1984 movie and this movie. Without out of the way, though, let's begin the autopsy of this dead-on-arrival superhero flick. So the basic rundown of this movie is that we follow this mercenary named Al Simmons, who works for this guy Jason Wren, who decides to double-cross him at, say, North Korean biohazard plant. And, well, spoiler alert, he dies. But he wakes up 5 years later looking like I can only describe as those spice pirates from the Clone Wars made a deal with Damon Wayans. And all he wants to know is what is going on. So luckily, John Leguizamo plays the Violator, who is probably the best character in the movie, if we're being honest. Sure, he could be pretty annoying, but he's actually pretty accurate to the comic book character. And he's, well, let's just face it, probably the only one trying in this movie. And he catches up Al by telling him that he went to hell and made a deal with the devil Malbolgia in order to gain power, or in order to lead his army. And this brings up one of the most controversial parts of this movie, the CGI Malbolgia. Now, he does look comic book accurate, but he looks terrible. And his lips don't move. Now, in the novel, the demon insists he uses telepathy to communicate, but that's not really addressed in the movie. So it just looks like some ADR is done into a closed sock puppet. Now Malbolgia makes a deal with Spawn, saying that he'd give him great power and the ability to revisit his wife Wanda in order to lead his army, in which Spawn greatly accepts. But when he realizes his face is heavily disfigured, Then he realizes that Wanda wouldn't recognize him. But he decides to visit their old place of residence anyway. And he sees Cyan's birthday, who's Wanda's child, which he realizes that she moved on and remarried and married to his best friend Todd. And this makes him really sad. But he does get caught at the party, and of course Wanda doesn't recognize him. But his old dog Spasm does, and it seems that Cyan and it seems to like him and feel pity toward him. But with the shock and realization that he's not going to be with Wanda and that she's already moved on, he decides that there's only one thing he can do: take revenge out on him, on Jason Ring. So he crashes the party. He takes up to Jessica and chases after her Jason, but he does survive and decides that he has to figure out some way to protect himself from this spawn and that he created. So Clown manages to convince Jason to implement a special device within Jason, and that will detonate a new plague called Heat 16 if Spawn decides to kill him, and ultimately bringing on the apocalypse, and that's so desired by Malbolgia. So Spawn confronts Violator about all the sketchy stuff, in which he turns into the beastly, terrifying version of himself with none of his personality, which he looks like this. It's better than Malbolgia, I'll give him that. Guess Marquez de is learning a bit. Good job. And then Conquistador, who saves the Spawn, gives him a little training on his suit, but then finds out that Jason taken Wanda, Terry, and Cyan hostage. So he has to go back and save them. So Violator and Spawn fight one last time, in which Spawn manages to decapitate him, and with his chains, in which Violator's dragged to hell. And Spawn decides to dedicate himself to fighting crime of New York City. Now let's start off with what's good with the movie. The pros. For example, the music. Great music. Spawn was always known to be super edgy here with the grunge style. And the composers know exactly what to do. I mean, they got Incubus, Marilyn Manson, Metallica. The overall soundtrack is amazing. Now, the first thing I'm mentioning is the soundtrack being the best part of the movie. It only goes downhill, trust me. But there's some good things to talk about this movie. For example, the costume design. While not perfect, a bunch of the costumes did look pretty close to the novel. In the graphic novels, despite having a terrible CGI cape, the rest of it looks pretty good. And Clown was on point. And it did feel like they did pay attention to the comics. Not much with the story, of course, but baby steps. Baby steps. And speaking of attention to the story, while it's not good, it's definitely knows the story somewhat well. It follows off fine enough, but it's the same way Dune 1984 follows the story. It's pretty much grocery shopping adaptation, where it just goes, that scene, even from the comics, it's in the movie, check. Character death from the comics, check. Clown, check. So on. Doesn't feel like a trend. It's more of trying to fit a criteria. Now, these were all the good parts of the movie. The soundtrack, most of the costume design, and a semi-faithful retelling of the story. Now this is where we go on to the bad part of the adaptation. Now some of the bad things about this movie include, obviously, special effects. Wow, these are bad. I know this is an older movie, but prior to this, we had Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, Star Wars, which was far better than anything that we've seen in this movie. I also want to talk about the set design too. This is the most boring sets I've ever seen. Seems like the only color that's in these sets is usually gray or brown. And not very good variety, as you could most likely tell. Also, it's just a crappy retelling of the story. I know that I said that it was accurate, though for the year this came out in Batman and Robin, in comparison, it is a lot more accurate than what we've seen in that movie. The Spawn the movie is a lot more accurate to the comics than Batman and Robin is to the accuracy of the Batman comics. And for an era in which superhero movies weren't that good, this movie included, I think that definitely helps it stick out a whole lot better. But bad telling of the stories is still a bad telling of the story. Overall, it's just not my thing. I know there are people who like this movie. At least 17% of critics like this movie, so there's definitely an audience. Even Roger Ebert liked this movie. Gave it 3.5 stars out of 4. So, for at least entertaining some people, well, I think, and that's good. But I can see why this isn't a good movie. Either, in my opinion, at least. The bad story, the bad effects, but the acting was decent enough, especially from John Leguizamo. But everything else, just... So, I think I'm going to end this review by giving this movie a 2 out of 10 rating. Mostly on the grounds of soundtrack and most of the costume design. If anyone has any suggestions for movies I could review next, please leave in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. And I will see you later. And it is now time for me to let the curtains to fall on this movie review. See ya.